41st hail came in at 0314 station time, same cadence as the 40 before it. A tight beam carrier wave, mathematically structured, designed to be impossible to misread. I logged it, tagged it, and did nothing. That was the order. Captain Reyes hadn't moved from his chair in 6 hours. He had a styrofoam cup of cold coffee balanced on the armrest that nobody mentioned and nobody touched. When the hail counter ticked to 41, he looked at it, looked at me, and said, "Note it." I noted it. The TFS Ardent Crossing was 11 days into a standard transit observation run through the Caval Corridor, a wedge of gravitationally complex space between the brown dwarf Hessian 7 and the outer boundary of Vareth Consensus territory. We weren't supposed to be here in any aggressive sense. The transit corridor was listed as contested, a polite diplomatic word meaning two sets of navigational claims that hadn't been reconciled yet, filed by parties who had never spoken directly. Fleet had sent us as a presence. Sensors only, no active emissions. Run quiet, log what you see, come home. What we saw was the Consensus noticing us in the first 40 minutes and beginning its contact protocol immediately. 41 hails over 9 hours, each one escalating slightly in signal strength, each one a mathematical structure that any sufficiently advanced species could decode. We decoded every one. I listened to them at my station with one earpiece in and one out, the way you listen to something you're professionally obligated to hear and personally obligated not to answer. The messages were precise. They followed a pattern the Vareth used, as far as we knew, with every new contact in their sphere. Identify yourself, state your purpose, firm your threat classification. 3 requests, repeated with variations. The Consensus was a machine intelligence in the most complete sense, not a collection of programs, a civilization that had restructured its entire decision architecture around probabilistic consensus loops. Every node fed into a shared model. The model updated in real time. When a new variable entered their space, the consensus loop ran the numbers until it had a classification it could act on. They had been running the numbers on us for 9 hours. At 0317, the passive array picked up the intercept formation completing its encirclement. 4 Vareth processing ships. What we called processing ships because they were less weapons platforms than mobile data aggregation nodes, though they were capable of weapons application, if the consensus model called for it, had been repositioning for the past 3 hours on a geometry, them at equidistant intercept range. They weren't weapons hot. They were measuring us. Every emission, every thermal return, every gravitational shadow the Ardent Crossing cast on the corridor's background field was being harvested and fed into the loop. I pulled up the intercept geometry on my secondary screen and felt something tighten in my chest that I noted and filed away. 4 ships. We were one. The Ardent Crossing was a diplomatic frigate, lean, fast, built for presence operations and nothing else, which meant its profile at passive running was as quiet as any ship in the Terran fleet. It had a full drive array underneath that quiet. It had a reactor output that, when unmasked, would read at a full order of magnitude above anything the consensus had cataloged in a vessel this size. It had been sitting in that corridor for 11 days breathing like a sleeping animal. The 42nd hail came in at 0341. Watched the counter. Reyes watched the counter. The rest of the bridge did what good bridge crews do, which is work without looking at the captain, and trust that the captain is working without needing to be watched. At 0342, Reyes set down the cold coffee. "Lieutenant Commander Voss," he said. "Let's answer." I opened my mouth to reach for the channel controls and he shook his head. "Not the comm," he said. "The drives." I understood. Had understood before he said it. The moment he said answer, some part of my mind had already moved past the comm panel to the power management board, because I had been sitting with this moment for 9 hours, and I had already thought through what answering with words would look like, and what answering with everything else would look like, and I knew which one was true. I pulled up the drive management interface. Full unmask was a 3-key sequence with a command confirmation. The Ardent Crossing had been holding her full signature behind a baffling configuration that reduced her apparent output to roughly the thermal equivalent of a survey tender. When I entered the sequence, the baffles would retract. Every drive coil, every reactor coupling, Every power conduit running through the hull would light up on Verath sensors. Simultaneously, I entered the first key. Confirm full unmask, the system said. Confirmed, I said. Voss Sarah, Lieutenant Commander. Authorization Echo 79 Kilo. I entered the second key. On the passive array, the 4 Verath processing ships were holding position. The consensus loop was active. I could see its carrier wave harmonics bleeding across the background field. 42 data points collected. Model dual running, classification still pending. I entered the third key. The Ardent Crossing woke up. There is no other way to put it. The ship had been technically operational for 11 days. But operational in the way a fist is operational when it's closed inside a pocket. All capability present, none of it visible. When the baffles came down, what the corridor felt was not a frigate warming its engines. The corridor felt was something that had been in the room the entire time, patient and quiet, choosing now to stand up. The drive coils cycled to full resonance. The reactor output, no longer baffled, its full thermal and electromagnetic signature into the corridor. The gravitational shadow the ship cast shifted, measurably, instrumentally, as the mass displacement systems came online. The Ardent Crossing was not a large ship. In fleet terms, she was mid-sized at best. 11 days of passive running had given the consensus exactly one dataset to build a model from, and that model had the Ardent Crossing filed somewhere between survey vessel and light transport. The model, at 342 hours and 14 seconds, encountered a discrepancy it could not resolve. I was watching the Verath carrier wave harmonics on my passive array when it happened. Census loop, that constant, cycling background frequency that I had learned to read the way a navigator reads a current, stuttered, transmission glitched, not a signal dropout. A stutter, the loop processing hesitated, dropped a cycle, restarted, then it hesitated again. I had never seen a Verath consensus loop stutter. I had read the contact reports, the intelligence assessments, the theoretical frameworks our analysts had built around consensus decision architecture. Every one of them said the same thing. The loop does not pause, it updates, it revises, it reclassifies, but it does not pause. Because a pause means the model has encountered a variable it cannot immediately integrate, and a civilization that has built its entire existence on probabilistic certainty does not encounter variables it cannot integrate. The loop paused for 11 seconds. In machine intelligence terms, 11 seconds is not a long time. In terms of what it means when a system built for instantaneous consensus takes 11 seconds to produce an output, 11 seconds is a very long time indeed. Reyes had not moved. His hands were folded in his lap. His expression was the expression of a man who had done the calculation, trusted the answer, and was waiting for the arithmetic to finish. At 3:42 and 31 seconds, the Verath intercept formation began to move. Not toward us. The 4 processing ships pulled back on a coordinated withdrawal vector, moving smoothly to a distance that our tactical overlay classified as observation range rather than intercept range. They did not power down. They did not leave. They repositioned to watch from a distance that said, in the language of fleet geometry, that the original model had been revised. At 344, the lead Verath node transmitted a data packet on the same carrier frequency they had used for 42 hails. It was not a hail. It was a classification update, formatted for their own internal records, not for our consumption, but transmitted on an open frequency, told me either they didn't care if we heard it, or they specifically intended us to. The data packet contained a single revised entry in what our linguists later identified as a consensus threat assessment archive. Under the header string that translated, roughly, as unresolved variable, observe and maintain distance, the entry read, Terran vessel class, indeterminate, capability profile, indeterminate, recommended action, do not intercept, do not engage, flag for senior consensus review. Verath had 42 data points on the Ardent Crossing. They had filed her as indeterminate. I sat with that for a moment. The corridor was quiet. The drive array hummed at my back. The brown dwarf Hessian 7 threw its dull amber light across the hull in long shadows. And the 4 Verath processing ships sat at their revised distance and watched us the way you watch something you have reclassified out of reach. Reyes picked up his cold coffee, drank some, set it back on the armrest. Log it, he said. I opened my entry and wrote the timestamp and the outcome in the plain language the fleet required. Contact event, Vareth consensus, Caval corridor. No shots fired, formation stood down. I wrote the 42 hails and the 11-second stutter and the revised classification packet. And then I wrote the last line. I wrote, "The Ardent Cross," did not answer the hail. The Ardent Crossing answered the question.